Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We this afternoon are going to take up in our first bit of testimony and under our oversight and accountability section. We're going to hear from the folks last year where there was appropriations for post-permanency adoption service, adoption post-permanency services. And then we're going to move into an update on the homeless shelter in St. Albans, again, where there were appropriations made to support those efforts. So what I would ask you to do is if you can open up to the committee webpage and then take a look under Katie McLean's name. You'll see there the language that was in the budget under section E 317.2. We had a fun time last year trying to figure out the one-time days back and forth on this post-permanency stuff. But in the end, we figured it out. So it was all good. But yeah, we had new folks in appropriations or in JFO and didn't necessarily have the history from the year before. And there was a lot of machinations going back and forth. But that's just for background, so you know why it is that we're hearing from the people that we're hearing from today, okay? All right, so we're going to hear from, and if you have other people with you, you're welcome to bring them here. Which one is Susan? Yeah, I thought so, okay. Susan, if you wouldn't mind, if you want to join us here at the front, and do you have, is this Paul? Okay, great. I know you can have a seat there, and I don't think we're going to have ledge council, so you can pull that chair over. Thank you. Yeah, no, you don't. Yeah, you don't. We like to make you feel uncomfortable, but not that uncomfortable. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. So we'll just do a quick around the room for introductions. I'm Teresa Wood. I'm from Waterbury. I also serve Bolton, Fuel Score, and Huntington.
Ann Donahue, Northfield and Berlin.
Dan Noyes. I represent Woolpit, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Hi, Representative Eric McGuire, Rutland City.
Bishop, Colchester, Chittenden 20.
For Miss Betty Westford, East Milford.
Representative Todd Nielsen, I represent Brandon and Farmington.
Zon Eastis, I represent Guilford and Vernon.
Hi, Esme Cole. I represent Windsor 6 and Hartford.
And I am Julie Miguel. I represent Bridport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Language.
Ray Garofano, Essex, and I also represent Essex Junctions. Oh, Lori Morse, committee assistant.
And then we go around the outside, Ken.
Okay, I'm Ken Schatz. I'm the interim CEO at Lund.
I'm Melissa Appleton. I'm the coordinator of post-permanency services at Lund. Becky Meladowski, the DRN, and I work with Lund.
And we'll come around here.
Karen Langland, Director of Programs and Services at Easter Seals Vermont.
Matthew DeGroat, Action Circles, working with Easter Seals.
Okay, and then the two of you get to introduce yourselves and welcome, and the floor is yours.
I'm Susie Reed. I'm Senior Director of Operations with Easter Seals Vermont, and I live in Wheelock.
Paul Gibo, I'm the Clinical Director for Easter Seals Vermont, and I live in Essex. Although we're going to be talking about services that are represented in Rutland County, Washington County, Memorial, Bennington, Caledonia, and Windsor for post-permanency services for Easter Seals Vermont. And Lund also has their areas that they cover. We really wanted to talk about the funding from last year and say thank you. We don't have an ask. We don't have a complaint. We really wanted to say thank you for it's $270,000, not just for us, but across Lund, Easter Seals, and NFI, which also serves a couple of counties. It has made an enormous difference for us. We feel we are able to attract and retain really high quality people. And the type of services we do, so these are families that are formed by adoption or through guardianship. And while that sounds very nice, and it is, these are also families that begin with loss. Often there's been abuse and neglect, and there are specialized things happening within these families. And our services, we're working in their homes in their communities. We're not in an office, we're trying to be separate from that. To really give direct support to families, as well as consultation with schools, consultations with families that we're not directly open to, who might have a one-time, whoa, something is really going on, can you help me out with this? And we feel, again, just grateful. We told the House committee that, or the Senate committee that earlier, and we want to say that today. I do want to talk a little bit about what post-permanency is. So we're really looking at a lot of children and sometimes families who have gone through trauma. And what we really focus on is being trauma informed. We're looking at healing, but we're also looking at early intervention and prevention. Because the trajectory of these children's lives and sometimes these families, without support, can easily go one way. But we feel with support, that is on an upward trajectory. We serve, Easter Seals does, we have about 145 families open on any given month, and we serve with 6 staff. And because we're going into homes, that's a fair amount of travel. But we really find that that's worth it, no matter the weather, no matter the circumstance. Prior to last year, the program had been level funded for 12 years. So for us, this is gigantic. And I think it's allowed us to break even on the program, honestly, which is important to us. We're a fairly small agency still, and for us, this is a big program. So when we're looking at treatment, or we're looking at working with families, and we're looking at trauma, really what we're often looking at is regulating, which is to say getting your emotions under control. And that's not just for the child, that's the parent. Anyone who's parented, period, or maybe been in a difficult situation, you understand getting yourself regulated is really the first step. Then we're looking at relating, which is to say the emotional back and forth that we have. How are we as parent-child? And then it's reasoning and changing. So we really have to back up and start not at, I've got the right answer, do it this way. We're starting further back. And I think there's a parallel process with what we do with families, in the sense that we want to be regulated with it. We want to relate, and then we're looking at reason and change and what's achievable in any given family, in any given circumstance. And we have offered this virtually, and we will expand virtual as needed. We also do run, currently we have one group going, and there are other groups that we plan to offer in the future. We welcome any questions or thoughts from the committee, but really our primary goal here today was to say thank you. And honestly, a little on the side, Easter Seals Vermont, I don't think is particularly well known because of the nature of our contracts. And to have our name out there, because although we're not asking for anything this year, you might see us back every year. Really, because this is one service, we have 5 other service lines.
How do people find you? So is there an automatic refer? So let's just say a DCF involved adoption or guardianship.
Yeah.
Is there an automatic referral to the program serving the county where the family is?
My understanding is that's in the works or it's been talked about, but no, this is referral on an as-needed basis. Families can self-refer, a school or community member could refer a family, then it's voluntary if the family wants to work with us and the supports and services.
I can see it being voluntary, but I can also see that people, if they don't know that you exist, then how are they going to know what kind of support they might be able to receive from you and make an informed choice about that?
I believe through the adoption process, working with Lund, that Lund informs them of post-permanency services being available to them.
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Steady.
Out of curiosity, how do you know they aren't already getting services from another organization? Is there like a database that you can go in and see? How do you know?
There's catchment areas. So Paul had mentioned early on, we have 6 different counties throughout the state. And so any referrals in there would come to us. And if Lund got a referral that was for Hartford, because often people will revert to Lund because they finalize the adoptions, they would send them to us. So whoever's in that catchment area as a provider, there's only 3. So there's NFI, Lund, and Easter Seals who does post-permanency services.
Well, I have a beautiful niece that came from Lund, so I'm partial. 24.
Yeah.
And my sister got her at 3 weeks, so I'm partial to Lund.
Yeah.
And when she could talk, we go by Lund and she said, that's where I come from. At the hospital, that's where her mother.
So you can, on our webpage, there is just a small slide deck there that will show you the services and a little bit of overview of Easter Seals. So we appreciate you being here. Are there any other questions for these witnesses? Thank you for your assistance, with families. And actually, I'm grateful that you're not here asking for money because there are plenty of other people who are. So we appreciate you being here and glad you spent some time in the Senate this morning as well. So it's great. And thank you. And thank you for sticking with us through the process last year, which I know, kind of made a circuitous route till we finally got to the end game. So thanks very much. Appreciate it.
We learned a lot too last year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. And now we're going to have folks from Lund come join us. For people who don't know, Ken Schatz used to have a different hat in this committee. So he was the former commissioner of DCF.
Yes. So thank you for that. And I did spend a lot of time in this committee, and I do appreciate the work of this committee. You have been steadfast in thinking about and making challenging issues for challenging problems. You've done a great job to make them work. So appreciate that. For today, I'm the interim CEO at Lund. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Appleton, who's the coordinator of our program, and she will give you a presentation.
Great, thank you. And folks, there is some information on your websites as well.
Great. So thanks so much again for this opportunity to testify. We really appreciate, as Easter Seal said, the funding support last year in the legislative session. It was a wonderful process for me and really rewarding to see the support for this program. I've been doing this work for the past 18 years. First 10, I traveled all over the state, meeting with families, and in the past, first 10 direct service, and then the past 8, I've been a supervisor. So working with some really amazing people doing that work, meeting with those families. I did, so I'm able to see daily the positive impact that this program has. I did want to share a quote that I think makes it a little bit more real about what these families sometimes experience. And so I'll go ahead and say what this caregiver says. And this is a parent who adopted through the Vermont foster care system. And so her son experienced early trauma, neglect, abuse, and had a lot of placements leading up to the adoption. So went through a lot before he was with his forever family. And this is what she had to say. Thanks to my post-permanency service provider, I learned that parenting children from the foster care system is not intuitive. These children often need the very opposite of what their bodies are communicating. When my son was hitting, kicking, yelling profanities at us, he really needed to know that we would not leave him, that we would indeed handle him and his behaviors. It takes a lot of courage, vulnerability, resources, self-care, and support to provide the sense of permanency and unconditional love in this situation. Post-permanency plays a primary role in this for my family, end quote. So I know Paul kind of spoke to what we do, but we are going into those homes. We are caregiver-focused support, and that's a little bit unique to the other services through some of the DAs and other services like therapy that might be out there. We're going to really be with that caregiver around what does your child need, and how can we support them? So those interventions and just making sure that they're responding to their family as best they can. We also are advocates. We're going into school meetings, team meetings, making sure those services are in place. We're also able to do what we call kind of case management or care coordination, making sure families know all those services, making referrals, giving them access to trainings, all of those things so they can do the best by their kiddo. We also have support groups too. So this family, with this quote, she accessed it all. And I think it shows that she was feeling supported in what she needed to do to be able to be there for her son. In my opinion, raising a child is one of the hardest jobs out there. And I just want to say that I think parenting through adoption and guardianship, while there are many joys, as Paul mentioned, there are also complexities and challenges. And so these parents do need that ongoing support. So the state's ongoing support for this program just is, we want to thank you again. That was so important, and being able to, for Lund and the other agencies, to uphold that programming so these families can be resilient and stable and do what they need to for their kids. I did send written testimony that you'll likely have, or if you don't already, and it just shows some of the numbers that we are serving. We also, something I like to highlight is we do all the agencies do an annual satisfaction survey, and we're getting high satisfaction from those surveys across the agencies. And so it is a service that families really appreciate and need. So thank you again for your support last year and ongoing support. I am open to any questions, and I can also speak to a couple of the questions earlier if that's helpful, just being from Lund.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I'm realizing that I made an assumption about, which doesn't, I don't think, from here listening to the two of you, is so it's do you only serve families who have adopted through some connection with DCF? Or it could be any kind of like private adoption, arranged, whatever, guardianship change. Could be a voluntary thing that family members do with themselves, in the court system. And okay.
We were having this conversation earlier. I can't remember the exact year, but it used to be only Vermont kids adopted through Vermont foster care, and it opened up to guardianship families, private adoptions. If you adopt from another state and you move to Vermont, that we are able to serve them, because we were seeing, those kids also needed support, and they were bumping up against mental health, other services, and needing some of those.
And so, what kind of work do you all do with the court system then? Because I mean, some of the situations that you deal with don't ever really have anything to do with DCF.
Yeah. So we're not necessarily working with the court system. It's after finalization, after guardianship, or that adoption date has taken place. And so it's really that after adoption or after guardianship phase.
So Lund certainly does.
Yes.
Through our project family,
Yes.
we do a lot of work with the court system, both the family court and probate court, in terms of finalizing adoptions. But in terms of post-permanency is a little bit of a separate category.
Okay. Again, I'm just trying to sort of get back to my question when I was asking, I was like, how do people find out about you? And if you have more to talk
so
about
I would say if a family adopts through the Vermont foster care system, I'm part of the adoption team at Lund. So I know that my colleagues are making sure those families know. I think we're still running up against when families finalize, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of paperwork, the court process, it's a lot. So families might lose that. So I think what Easter Seals was saying, there is this, the future is that we would be reaching out to families at intervals, and we're just waiting. We're partnering with our DCF permanency manager to figure that out, because we don't know, we don't have access to those records, but being able to figure out how to reach out to families before they're going into crisis or they're feeling really overwhelmed by their child's behavior. So there's something in the works for that, for sure. And I would say we are still trying to figure out for guardianship families, because those are through probate court. And so we have done some reach out to probate courts. And if a family comes from another state, that is a challenge of how to get the word out if they did not adopt through the Vermont foster care system. Is that making a little bit more sense?
It is. It's a little loose for my comfort level, to be honest with you. Just because, we have lots of different things like this all around the state in different areas. And yet, we hear from people all the time, constituents, I didn't know about that, or how does one find out about that? And, or you hear the stories in the supermarket line when people know that you're a legislator and they want to share. So you hear stories like that. So Representative Bishop.
My wife was adopted through Lund 59, coming up with 59 years ago. I don't think she or her parents are looking for post-permanency. But in my mind raises the question, and tagging on to what Chair Wood was asking, it sounds like most time services come at the start of the placement. Can someone access services 6 months, a year, 3 years later?
Absolutely, yes. So it can be, sometimes our Project Family folks are referring at time of adoption, hey, this would be a good resource for you, but it is at any time. We have kids that have been adopted for 10 years, families calling us and saying, hey, we're hitting the teen years, we're having some struggles, can we get some support? So at any time up until that child is 18. Yeah.
And to the point of the question that the chair was asking, is there communication or information shared with agencies where those families may be having contact with others at that 6 month, 3 year, whatever mark?
I'll help with that because I appreciate the question and the follow-up. The reality is, I think the need is ongoing to communicate what we do to the right people so that the people have knowledge of what's available when somebody asks or needs. So we do make an active effort, and candidly, we're enhancing that to educate people about an array of services. From Lund's perspective, all our services. We want people to know about them, whether they're service providers or community groups. And so, as was discussed, there is a potential for a warm handoff from DCF, but months later, years later, the need might arise. And what we're hopeful for is that the word is out there so that people who need the service can hear about what we or Easter Seals or NFI has to provide and can take advantage of that. But it's not exact. So social media, as an example of another form of communication, is something, we're certainly doing a lot more of to try to educate people on an ongoing basis about what's available.
Yeah. Representative Garofano and then Representative Cole.
Thank you for being here. And two families that are Lund families. My family was also my daughter was adopted through Lund, and we had amazing experience. But I remember we used to go to a family picnic, and I was just thinking that might be a good opportunity. I know that's a great idea since COVID, but that might be a good opportunity for at least families that are connected because it is a big event, and a lot of families, even different ages, are attending or at least get the notification. So it might be a good opportunity to kind of get the word out from the different services that are available. So just bring those back because we love those.
It came back this last fall, so
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I did
you
not
didn't
get
know.
that,
We'll
yeah.
have to make sure you know, yeah.
So for those of you not familiar, Lund does an annual picnic every year for adoptive families. And it is a celebration, as you can imagine. Lots of kids, lots of activities, but your point is well taken, that it's also an opportunity to educate people about what there is out there to enhance support.
Oh, Representative Cole.
Just to be sure that I'm understanding correctly, could a family call Lund, for example, for navigating guardianship paperwork specifically that is very
They could. It wouldn't necessarily be, I think that's usually on the pre-side of it, just because I don't know all the nuances of the court process with that yet.
So we do have that capacity to assist people. We're not lawyers, so I want to be a little bit careful about that, but we do give advice about how to work their way through the guardianship probate court process for people doing that on their own. But I would tell you, I think it's an area that we could improve. We could do more to try to work with the court system to make it more accessible and also do better to assist people's access.
Is there a current contact person at Lund who would be at least a starting point to?
I would probably say Wanda, who is the director of our adoption services. I'm glad to give you that contact information if that'd be helpful.
Sure, thanks.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask a sort of a totally nuanced question that doesn't have anything to do with individuals except for the money that it takes. So oftentimes we hear from nonprofits that the contracting process, the grant process with DCF is laden with delays and let's just say a lack of timeliness in getting resources out to nonprofits. And I know that they have been trying to improve that, and you know, I'm sure there will be, if there isn't already, a bill that's trying to you know, adjust the state's granting and contracting process. So I'm just curious as to, you know, if you, one, have seen any improvement, or if it has even been an issue for either of you, Easter Seals or Lund. Why don't I go to Easter Seals first? Yeah.
So we have multiple contracts. Families. And historically, there was some delays in some of our contracts. More recently, they've been much more timely. When our permanency contract was renewed in October, it was prior to the October 1 date, they gave us a rate increase. That was based on money that we received from the legislature, as well as there was a date of the DEVA rate review, which is what they started on. And they increased our caseloads along with the increase. So I think it is improving slowly. The grant department there was one specific to family services. And I think a couple of years ago, they moved it so it's for all of DCF, all paid tests perhaps.
No, just DCF.
So there's so many more. So we used to work with Nancy Miller, and she knew all of our contracts inside and out. Call her, give her, you know, we need this change, I would say yes. And then it moved, and then it was a mess. And now it's starting to come back together. We're starting to build those relationships and to get to know the people who are working better. Okay, so this is coming.
It's coming. Thank you. What about you?
So my response is that it's mixed. So the reality is Lund has contracts and grants from every department within the Agency of Human Services except Dale. And so we do have a range of experience in light of that. And I would also say it's improving from what I've been told about the past. I've been there 6 months, but the reality is some of our contracts and grants have come in a very timely fashion. Others are frankly quite slow. Lund is a big enough organization so that we can manage the cash flow issues, which some smaller nonprofits have significant trouble with. I will say the DCF people in particular have been very responsive. When there have been delays, they have kept in touch, and we've worked our way through it. So I think there is still some room for improvement, to be sure, but I do feel like they are working on it, and it's definitely getting better. And we do particularly appreciate, though, the challenge for smaller nonprofits. So that is something to continue to work on.
Representative Stady, did you have a question from before?
I did. Where does it fit in where young mothers that want to keep their children? How does that fit in? Is this anything to do like this part of the funding?
So, I mean, I'll respond quickly, like Melissa, if you want to add.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the reality is we do options counseling with pregnant women, and we talk about keeping their child and what supports would they need to make that work. We talk about adoption, to be sure, sometimes, or it could be termination of the pregnancy if that is something they're interested in. So we do our best to provide the range of options and support what the family wants.
And this is part of the budget.
It's all part of what Lund does. It's a little different. It is not part, the post-pregnancy support program is separate.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah. So I think that, just if that family did make an adoption plan, that would follow that adoptive family, you know, and we do, I will say, like, we are having conversations about, you know, openness in adoption and supporting birth family contact if it's safe and healthy for the child. But
no, I meant mothers that don't want to put their kids up.
Right.
Oh, sure,
We support them.
Because
Yes,
not everybody wants.
absolutely
They don't
right.
have that, they need the help.
Oh, no, I want to be very clear.
Okay.
We do support and try to assist
Curious.
mothers and families who want to keep their
Okay.
child and have some challenges. We will do the best we can to support them in addressing those challenges so that they can keep their child.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Thank you both all for being here. Appreciate it. And it's always lovely to hear people saying thank you. It's not-
Yeah, it is. It's nice.
And appreciate the fact that, a cost of living increase once every 12 years doesn't really cut it. That message isn't lost. So thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Committee members, we are going to do a little shift. We're going to have Tucker Anderson here. Our other witnesses are arriving also, but Tucker's had a change in his agenda, and so we're trying to get him here quickly to go over the FOIA information, Freedom of Information Act information, and sort of protocol, I guess you might call it, for legislators. That might be helpful. Just quickly, anybody having any issues about getting any information on your budget assignments? Just a quick check-in about that. Are people being able to hook up with people that you need to, your probes members, your department folks? All right, that's good. So, Eric, yeah?
No, we're good.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, good. 5 minutes for Tucker. Okay, well, we'll see who.
The others in.
Oh, are they in the waiting room?
They just.
Okay, yeah, sure, go ahead, Leslie.
You guys have a lot of.
Well, I don't know. We're playing that Tucker needs to, if we can maybe wrap this up in 15 minutes, then Tucker will have a half hour to go over his stuff. That would be great. Hi, Mark.
Hello there. How are you, Madam Chair?
Oh, well, we're all doing well here.
Hi.
Hi, Will. Good afternoon. We have a slight adjustment because we have a alleged council member who needs to go a little bit earlier, but we're going to hear from you folks and get the update and answer any questions first. But I'm going to try to keep it to about 15 minutes or so. Does that work for you? Okay, great.
We can do it in 15 for sure.
Okay. We're just gonna do, this is your first time in committee this year. We're gonna do a quick run around the room so you know who all is here. So Teresa Wood from Waterbury, also Sir Bolton, Buellscore, and Huntington.
Ray Garofano, Essex and Essex Junction. Nice to see you both.
Hi, Ray.
Hi, Jubilee McGill, Bridgeport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Esme Cole. I represent Hartford.
As we pop over here, I'm Zahn Eastis from Guilford and Vernon.
Representative Nielsen, I represent Brandon and Forest.
Representative Steady, East Milton, Westford.
Doug Bishop, Colchester's Chittenden 20 District.
Representative Eric McGuire, Rutland City.
Good afternoon, Dan Noyes. I represent Belvedere, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Woolkit.
Ann Donahue, Northfield and Berlin. Just so folks know, Mark and I have worked together since 1982 on the streets of New York City.
That's crazy.
And Lori.
42 years, Ann. We were like
Been in
22. And we haven't gotten any grayer at all.
All right, hold on just a second.
One
Hold
more
on.
introduction.
Go ahead.
I'm Lori over here, committee assistant.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Okay, great. And the two of you can introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Okay, Will, you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Will Town, I am the Chief Operating Officer at Spectrum Youth and Family Services.
And Mark Redmond, Executive Director of Spectrum. So I'm just going to go first. He's our COO. He'll give you the details. First of all, I want to thank this committee for appropriating the money for our shelter, which will be opening up in St. Albans. Thank you, many of you, for visiting us in the middle of the session last year. I mean, the big news for us is this. You probably saw it in the news last week, but we got an anonymous donation of $1 million.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, to fund our work in St. Albans, not only the shelter, but we're doing mentoring up there, the youth development program, the drop-in center, the Compass program, which DCF funds. So to get $1 million, and there was a family that does not live in Lamoille in Chittenden County, in Franklin County. They don't even live there. So for those people to give a donation of $1 million, and then the Hale family pledged $125,000 for the next 3 years. And Mrs. Hale grew up in St. Albans in poverty, so that family has a real soft spot for St. Albans and the work being done there. And I know who the anonymous donor is. Trust me, if you people had not done what you did and give us this $1 million would not have occurred. Okay? So it's a good example of one good thing building upon the other, right? You stepped forward and came through with the funds, most of the funds we needed. And now philanthropy has followed. So that's exciting news for us. It really puts a firm financial base underneath. We started in St. Albans, right? Well, 3.5 years ago, it was one family gave us $200,000. I said, we're going to start a drop-in center. We have no idea where the money's going to come from after that. And it just shows you that the faith that people have in the young people of St. Albans and the faith they have in our organization. So again, it was what you folks did last spring was what really kind of catapulted this. So I'll just say that. Will, do you want to talk about the specifics of where we're at with the building and when we think it's going to open and details like that?
Sure. Yeah. So I will just start off by again echoing Mark's sentiment. I think this project, it's definitely been a long road, but one of the key pieces to its hopefully long-standing success is this idea of partnership, and that's both with the state and Spectrum, but also with other community partners in the St. Albans area. So right now, the latest update I have is a mid-March opening for this, and I can kind of outline how we have gotten to that point. So we applied and got some capital funding with Champlain Housing Trust, and that was applied for at the end of July. And we decided that we felt it was really important to partner with Champlain Housing Trust, one, because of their expertise and presence in the St. Albans area, but also to help us kind of move through the renovation, purchase of a building, all of that kind of stuff, because that is their area of expertise. The other reason is we had identified a location on Lake Street, which is about 1.5 blocks, maybe 2 blocks from our current drop-in center. So it really was the ideal location. And this space had already been looked at before the pandemic to be used as a shelter. So we felt that that was a great fit. Upstairs in that building are recovery residences, and the Vermont Foundation of Recovery owned those. And it really felt like an amazing opportunity for us, Champlain Housing Trust and Vermont Foundation of Recovery, to kind of partner on this project and be able to like maintain and solidify both our shelter services in that building as well as the recovery residents upstairs. So middle to end of August, the award was granted, and then in the middle of September, commitment letters from VHCB were signed with Champlain Housing Trust, and they were able to close on that building beginning of October. We then discovered that because of the pandemic, the zoning had lapsed on the space, so we had to go through the whole new zoning process. Which, it went well. We were able to present in November and get zoning approval at the end of November, which we felt was a huge win. I think there's been a lot of resistance in that community to shelters specifically, but we felt that that was a big win to get that through. And so now, once the subcontractors that Champlain Housing Trust have lined up have begun work, they feel like a mid-March completion of the renovation was good. But this is something that we're really excited about. We know in the last year, there's 29 youth of like the 300 that we served out of our drop-in center that were experiencing homelessness and would access that shelter. And, with a 10-bed residence, we feel very comfortable that we can accommodate that volume of participant throughout the year.
Well, the fact that you were able to get a zoning decision in less than 6 months, I mean, that's like, I think, when you think about the appropriation process, so let's say July 1st, you knew in May that you'd be having the money, but, July 1st, the money doesn't start to flow, and things went from a kernel of an idea to actual partnership with Champlain Housing Trust, getting your zoning through, securing money, getting private donations and developing a program in in less than a year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty remarkable. I don't know. I think you ought to give lessons to some of our other communities around the state.
Yeah.
I think that is actually pretty remarkable that so much has been achieved in that amount of time. So I'm curious to know what would be your ongoing relationship, for instance, with DCF and housing opportunity grants and things like that for ongoing running of the shelter?
Great question. So the money that you all approved is being operated out of the HOP grant through the Office of Economic Opportunity on a yearly basis. We, Mark kind of alluded to this, but the fact that we got this $1 million is really helpful for ongoing expenses. As you know, costs just continue to increase. We also had to look at our staffing structure in between the time that this money was allocated. So we are starting off behind financially, and we would, expect to probably apply for a little bit more money through HOP for continued operation. But Mark and our development team and this gift is really very helpful in kind of keeping us comfortable with ongoing operations for definitely the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Yes, Representative Bishop.
Just to confirm if I heard correctly, I think I heard you say that you serve up to 300, can serve up to, or have served up to 300 youth at the drop-in center, and 29 have been identified, if you will, as in need of services at a youth homeless shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Does that match the capacity, or what is the capacity of the soon-to-open facility?
Yeah. So we're hoping to have 10 beds at a time out of that shelter. The 29 youth identified are, over a span of a year. So it's not all at once. And that does not necessarily mean at this given time there are 29 youth in St. Albans that need shelter. We think at this point in time it's a handful. So we're definitely comfortable with our capacity. In Burlington, we operate 2 shelters. We have an 8-bed shelter and another 10 to 12 bed shelter, depending on weather conditions. And we have not been having to turn folks away for capacity. And there's definitely a much larger population in Burlington. But we also believe that the opening of this shelter will help alleviate a little bit of the capacity pressures in Burlington as well, because we do have some youth from St. Albans that come down to the Burlington shelters.
Representative Garofano.
Thank you. So nice to see you both, and so exciting to hear. Congratulations on your amazing work. I was curious, what is the average length of stay at Burlington, and what do you expect for St. Albans with the housing crisis?
Yeah. I can just tell you, so I've been at Spectrum for 12 years and came up through the housing programs. And when I was working in the shelters and case managing and running them, our average length of stay in shelters was around 90 days. I can tell you now it's like almost a year. It's really, really, really difficult to find places for folks to transition to, especially young folks who don't have a credit history, don't have a rental history, any of that kind of thing. And so we understand that shelter is not necessarily the end all be all solution, but it certainly is important right now. And especially in a young person's life, having a more immediate intervention is helpful. But yeah, obviously as length of stays increase, then it clogs up the pathway for other folks as well. So yeah. So that's definitely a statewide shelter conversation going on right
now. I was just asking our previous witnesses about this, and I know that it has been an issue for Spectrum in the past, but thinking about the state's contracting and granting procedures, and have you had any unusual, and you can respond not only with regard to this shelter money, but with any other, I know you have multiple grants and contracts with the state. So what have you seen in terms of the state's ability to produce timely grants and contracts?
What have you seen, Will? Be honest now.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Hop, it's a pretty well-oiled machine that we have experienced for sure. I think some of the other contracts that are reimbursement based can definitely present some cash flow problems, and we've had to pull from reserves to, make the payroll work and everything like that. But yeah, I think that's my experience.
Yeah, it's been okay. I know what the issues are because we talked to other nonprofits which have to take out lines of credit and things like that. We don't have to do that, thankfully, but I'm very sympathetic to the issue and to other nonprofits.
So, you referenced the expense-based reimbursement, and do you not have to do that with HOP grants?
We do, right? Well,
Yeah, we do quarterly reimbursements with them.
Okay, so it is still expense-based reimbursements.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think we've had any issues on like timeliness or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for the update. We look forward to our invitation to the grand opening. I said it about 5 times. So
yeah, you have.
If we don't get one, I don't know. It's gonna be something, but
it'll be great.
We look forward to it. So thank you both for being here, and appreciate really the work that you're doing and the speed with which you're doing it. So appreciate that.
Should we start a consulting, Teresa? Should we start a consulting business?
Yeah, I was only, tongue in cheek a little bit. There are lots of folks who've been working at trying to get this done for a long time, and they have not been nearly as successful as quickly as you folks have been. So you've got some magic going on there. Just keep it flowing.
We're going to try. Thank you all. Thanks for having us today. And thank you again for your generosity to Spectrum. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Bye.
Okay, Tucker, welcome to House Human Services.
Thank you all for having me. It's such a lovely room. I was starting to nod off at the corner.
Yeah. It is a nice, airy, open, sunny room. So we'll just do a quick round because I don't think you've met all of us yet, maybe. Teresa Wood. They'll dispense with the.
And Donahue.
I'm Dan Noyes.
Eric McGuire.
Doug Bishop.
Brenda Steady.
Representative Todd Nielsen.
Zahn Eastis.
Esme Cole.
Jubilee. Hi, Todd Ranger. Tucker, I'm sorry.
And Lori. So welcome and thank you for being here and adjusting your time and everything. So appreciate it. This is going to be sort of a rehash for some of us, but I think it's a good reminder, and then it'll be brand new for some other folks. So whatever you can offer us on keeping us out of trouble when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act would be most appreciated.
Well, good afternoon. For the record, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. Thank you very much for having me. And as far as keeping you out of trouble, trouble will always find you. We just attempt to manage it. I can give you as much detail as you would like about the Public Records Act, or as little. I can riff for as much time as you need until around 2:15. Thank you very much for being so flexible today. If you would like, what I can do is just maybe in the first 15 minutes cover generally what the Public Records Act demands of you as legislators, independently elected constitutional officers, and your own public agencies, and then talk a little bit about records management practice, kind of the best things you can do to keep things orderly as you move through the biennium, to make your jobs and my job easier in the event of a Public Records Act request.
Great.
Does that sound?
That sounds perfect.
Wonderful. All right. So in general, the Public Records Act is not a scary thing. So please don't hold fear in your heart. If you see an email from me with the letters PRA in the heading, it is a set of procedures for the public to request access to records that public agencies produce in the course of agency business. any written or recorded material can be a public record that falls under that definition for purposes of the Act. It doesn't matter where that written or recorded information is located or what its formatting is. It could be your HHS guiding principles on the wall over here written on a marker board. It could be a text message. It could be a GIF that you've sent in an email. And I said GIF as in GIF, GIF. So just be aware that anytime you are recording information in some form, even on your personal devices, and you are producing or acquiring that information in the course of your legislative business, you are creating public records that are subject to the Act. The simple fact that a public record is created doesn't necessitate that it will ever be accessed under the Public Records Act. The Act sets out that any member of the public, and that is the broadest sense of the word public ever. It is anyone in the world. Doesn't have to be an identifiable individual. It could be an even broader definition of the term person. It could be a corporation, a law firm. Think of any entity or organization contacting a public agency to request access. So, member of the public asks, can I have draft 1.3 of H111? They can ask it in person, send you a text message or an email. There's no specific form or format for the request. As long as they're asking for an identifiable record or piece of information, it's going to fall under the Public Records Act. And that automatically triggers a set of procedures that the public agency has to follow. And the most important that I'll flag for you is that there are specific timelines in the Public Records Act that must be followed. And at the expiration of those timelines, there's an automatic right to appeal. So the standard timeline is 3 business days. Not all days are equal, so I will emphasize that this is 3 business days, and for you all, it's legislative days. That is the prompt timeline, and that is for normal requests that don't meet one of the exceptions in 1 VSA section 318, specifically in subsection D. The next timeline is the 7 calendar day timeline, and that is for records that are in active use or that are in storage and have to be retrieved. And
how's active use defined?
If I am creating a record that you are requesting, I have 7 calendar days to respond to your request. Yeah. Remember that the Public Records Act was also adopted at a time when we didn't have as much electronic storage of information. So active use at that time likely meant I have 1 copy of this thing and it is currently with a field officer who is 150 miles away and won't be back in the office until next week. Probably the most commonly used longer timeline is the 10 business day timeline. That is the maximum cap under the Public Records Act, and it applies to unusual circumstances, which we sometimes throw in quotes because the circumstances are not all that unusual, but they fall outside of the normal prompt timeline. There are 3 individual criteria. If the request meets any one of those 3, it's unusual circumstances. You have 10 business days to respond. The most common is the criteria of a single request for a voluminous amount of separate and distinct records. So the example that I gave for those of you who are at new member orientation is a request to the Department of Fish and Wildlife for every email over the last 10 years containing the word fish. Voluminous amount of separate and distinct records in a single request automatically triggers the extended timeline. It's probably too much detail for purposes of this discussion, but I like to linger on the point of the timelines because I want to impress upon everyone that the timing really matters and that the most important part of preparing for and responding to a Public Records Act request is being diligent and fast with how you reach out to your counsel or whoever you might want to work with, or if you're going to perform what we call a dislocated search, which is where you do all of the work on your own and then seek advice about the records that you're going to produce. That all has to happen pretty quickly. And the session gets so busy that it's easy to lose a day. And if you lose a day and it's a normal response, well, you just lost a third of the time that you had to find the records, review them, get legal advice about any potential exemptions that might apply, issue a certification letter. 48 hours to do that is suddenly a very brief period of time.
So can I ask a question when there's a request? Like we get requests all the time and we wouldn't necessarily assume that it's under the, Public Records Act. Do people have to say, that they're making a specific request under the Public Records Act or the Freedom of Information Act?
They don't have to.
Okay.
They can request, a document that you might have or access to information that you might have, and it will automatically be governed by the Public Records Act, whether or not they have specifically stated that they're making the request pursuant to the PRA.
So often we have different drafts of legislation. That's something that people, sitting around the room often will ask for, a copy that's in process. And sometimes those are posted on our website and sometimes they're not posted. So because they're literally in process. All of those things are included. Is that right?
They are all subject to the Public Records Act, and you've given me a perfect segue for me to get out of the timelines and the procedures and into a little more substantive discussion of the next steps. If it is a document that's posted on the General Assembly's webpage, which the vast majority of the records that our branch produces are posted there, you have proactively disclosed the record. And you can simply respond by saying, please go to the General Assembly's website, which is the most polite way of saying, do your own research. Good note to say that if you're being asked to do research, that is not something you have to do under the Public Records Act. This is a very straightforward, I would like access to this record that exists. And you say either, no, it doesn't exist, or here it is, or I'm withholding it. So the next part, something that is not publicly disclosed yet. You might get a request for a record. It doesn't have to be a bill. It could be any record that you possess. And you note that there are potentially legal interests or rights or privacy concerns involved, or maybe it's a draft that has not been published yet. You are now in the zone where you are reviewing a record to either redact or withhold it. The Public Records Act acknowledges a large amount of privacy interests. So I sent the most updated list for purposes of the Vermont statutes annotated. These are just the statutory exemptions. There are 294. That's just Vermont law. I always bring it up when I do these overviews that the very first exemption in the Public Records Act includes any confidentiality established by law. So not just Vermont law. That first exemption covers federal law. Who knows if there's international law privacy interest? Not me, I haven't run across it yet. And then later on, there's any disclosure of information that would violate a common law duty. So now we've incorporated the entire history of common law from the British Empire through the formation of the colonies and eventually the United States. So hundreds of years of legal precedent are also involved here. This is vast.
Bishop.
So that would include the attorney-client privilege that we would have with legislative counsel. I'm thinking about introducing a bill to do away with the Agency of Human Services I talk to Ledge Counsel about that, but I never do it. But someone says, I'd like to see a record. I understand you were going to do this. I wouldn't have to respond.
Exactly. The common law duty, attorney-client privilege would apply under C4, but additionally, the legislative offices have confidentiality provisions built into the statutes governing our offices. So legislative counsel has a specific confidentiality provision that it says, unless or until a member of the General Assembly waives their confidentiality, legislative counsel is prohibited from disclosing to anyone in the world but you that request or information related to it. And we apply that through the first exemption of the Public Records Act because that is confidentiality established in law.
Go ahead. Or sorry, Steve.
So just what Doug was just saying. So it's not so much a matter of not responding. You have to respond to the person requesting the information, but the response is that it's confidential. And yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So you respond with a certification letter,
Yeah.
which is required under the Public Records Act. And the certification letter explains you searched for the records. This number of records were responsive. Here are the bases for withholding or redacting. And that gets put, if you're going to release the records with redactions, that gets put on the cover. And that letter also explains that there are appeal rights associated with any time you withhold or redact information. And the first level of appeal goes to the officer in charge of the public agency. And I don't see any eyebrows going up yet, but you are all public agencies. Therefore, you are also the head of your own public agency as an independent constitutional officer. So if you, as an individual legislator, receive a Public Records Act request, you deny access to the record, and then the person says, I'm going to appeal, you are now in the position of reviewing your own decision on appeal. Of course, there is another level of appeal after that, which is that the requester can go to the Superior Court for review and relief, if appropriate. Does not happen that often. I've only seen it happen once.
Yeah.
I was the chair of the select board in Guilford. We had 11 violations, the open meeting law requests that turned into violations of open meeting law, 11 of them in about 4 months. So I'm very, 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 very aware of all this and dealt with it a lot. So yeah.
One of the things when we talk about records management, I know that I was given advice at one time that seemed to be good advice, and that is to not utilize my personal email for legislative business, to only utilize my, legislative address unless I want to disclose all my other personal email and have to go through all of that stuff. Is that seem, seeing you nod your head, so I'm presuming that is still good advice.
It is the best advice. In fact, I included my new member orientation presentation in the documents that I sent to the committee today, and it's one of the things that I flag every biennium for the new members. Legislative business should be conducted on your legislative email account. You should try to create records that you're creating using your legislative IT, and your personal and political business should be done off of the legislative devices and legislative email. Great reasons for it. One is just keeping that divider so it's easier for you to manage and discover records, keeping your two lives separate. But also, if you request my assistance with a records response, one of the things that I'll ask you is, do you want to perform your own search, or would you like us to establish an e-discovery? An IT, with my assistance, structures a request that matches exactly what the person is asking for, submits it into the magical Outlook control box, and a confidential inbox is automatically formed with all of the responsive records. And then we don't have to go through a more comprehensive line-by-line search. We get a very good sampling of what we're looking for in response to the request. It speeds up our ability to respond to these significantly. Harder to do that when there's 500 emails on your legislative account that is not legislative business, but contains a word that we're searching for. And also, if you do conduct legislative business on your personal devices, we can't use that search function. And I/my team will also decline to assist you in the search because I don't want to be shoulder surfing over you while you're scrolling through all of your personal messages on your personal device. Be very uncomfortable for both of us.
Go ahead, Representative Bishop.
Can you define for us legislative business? And I guess more specifically, what level of privacy or personal sort of approach? I'll give one example. My mother texts me and says, do you consider issue X before your committee? I text her back, we do. And it's something I've thought a lot about because of these three concerns. Is that discoverable or subject to a public records request?
So likely, yes, to answer the last part of your question, to go back to where you started with, what is legislative business versus non-legislative business.
My mother's not a Vermonter. I
Don't
think that changes anything, but
it likely doesn't, Vermont legislators conducting legislative business that goes outside of the bounds of Vermont and is of public interest elsewhere in the United States. So Representative Donahue is Judge Learned Hand, who had the quote about identifying obscene and graphic material like pornography, right? When you see it, it's the same with legislative business. You likely have an idea of what is within the legitimate sphere of legislative conduct and legislative business versus what is not than I do. I have some easy examples for you. If you are working on a piece of legislation, receiving questions about a piece of legislation, that's the work that you do. It sounds like it's legislative business. If you are corresponding with a constituent about a particular issue that is coming in front of the General Assembly, or they are petitioning or instructing you under Article 20 of the Vermont Constitution, kind of sounds like that's legislative business too. You'll have to learn how to draw the lines. In the context of records management, the standard for a lot of the records retention that we see for other public agencies is the record useful to the agency in the conduct of its business? If it doesn't have any enduring use, you don't need to retain it, right? So I would say the same thing here is what you are producing or acquiring useful to the conduct of your business as a legislator, then it's probably a record related to your legislative business.
got this from the Sergeant at Arms office. A constituent has called and asked me to support a particular piece of legislation. I can make a judgment call. This does not have enduring use. This is nice to know, stored away, and I get rid of this.
Yes. We're about to jump into some very complex areas of the Public Records Act and records management here, and I won't go too deep into this about retention, but your first question, would that be a record that is related to your business? Absolutely. Constituent petitioning you on a particular issue that you might be confronting as a legislator. Kind of sounds like it's a legislative record, definitely sounds like it's a public record that would be subject to the Public Records Act. The records management guidelines that we use might allow that to be purged instead of retained. You got the information, it has only transitory value, right? The message is delivered, you've processed it, doesn't have enduring value, you might be able to purge it. Not every record has enduring, archival, ongoing value to a public agency.
Representative Gill.
Yeah, so this came up actually during the summer. We have a lot of study committees and task forces, and often we put people with lived experience or whose job isn't within the public, who can provide valuable insight, and they often use their personal email for group discussions. So where would they could they become subject to a FOIA request by serving on legislative task force and study committees and things like that?
Yes, so, that sort of public body would be a public agency. So keep the open meeting law and the Public Records Act separate because the Supreme Court has told us to do so.
Yes.
But yes,
Okay.
and that individual would be creating, and I'm assuming acquiring, public records. And if they're using their personal email, doesn't matter that it's their personal email or where the record is stored. It's the nature of the record that matters.
Something we should be providing education to people about, I believe.
Yeah.
That was my, just a follow-up. Do you know if there is any information provided to folks who do agree? You don't.
I don't know. One thing that I would flag, this is kind of a parallel issue, particularly I'm assuming for your committee, is when witnesses submit testimony of a sensitive nature to your committee, or sometimes there's public hearings about an issue that your committee might be covering. Often that material not only is kept in an enduring record, but we post quite a bit of it. And it is not infrequent that I will receive a request from a member of the public that says something along the lines of, "Hi, I emailed legislator X around this public hearing, and I divulged this illness that I have, or I divulged that I have substance disorder, and now I'm seeking housing." And the first Google result that comes up if you Google my name is the email that I sent to the committee.
Wow.
That happens all the time because we have a .gov website, and that means that Google puts the search results from our website first on the page. So if you Google my name and the word Vermont, you see, 100 pages of things that I've submitted to committees in the legislature. But if I was a random citizen from the state who submitted a document or appeared and testified or provided written testimony at a public hearing on a sensitive issue, that's going to be the number one result. So, some work with constituents and the people testifying to let them know that this is a public record that you're submitting, that it will be proactively disclosed on the website along with a lot of other letters, but just to let them know and be aware.
Well, I think that's an important point. And when you were talking, Jubilee, also about people who serve on task forces and committees and stuff like that. Yeah. Rip Donahue.
So I think something that's probably frequent for many of us is constituent contacts prior to you being able to tell a constituent, So if I have a constituent, well, people know that I'm a mental health advocate. So I often just got one last week from somebody who said, I was just admitting my dad to the psychiatric unit, and I discovered they're closing it in Berlin, and I'm really upset and want to advocate about it. Clearly legislative inquiry. But she was not intending to make it a public record, the status of her family members' health and so forth. Is there any exemption in terms of personal communications with constituents? Or if I then emailed someone, an advocate, and said, help me get information for this constituent. I'd really like to think about, maybe a bill that we could introduce, and wanted to have kind of brainstorming with advocates about that legislative issue on email. Is all that disclosable?
You're dancing in all of these very sophisticated areas of the Public Records Act that I find fascinating, and we could probably riff for like 2 hours on them. But the quick answer is that, yes, there are numerous exemptions that would cover that sort of personal information contained within your records. So if a constituent reaches out to you with, for example, they disclose something personal about their lives, in the communication that they send to you, that would be subject to review for exemption under 1 BSA 317C7, which covers personal information contained within agency files, in which the Supreme Court has said the standard for reviewing that information is whether it would cause embarrassment, harassment, loss of employment, or loss of friends. So looking at that, we could say embarrassment, right? We're talking about really the standard is, would the scale, the ledger of how sensitive the person's private information is outweigh any public interest on the other side of the ledger? And the answer with most of that personal information is absolutely. In addition, and this is the most interesting area for me, is that there are two constitutional interests involved with a constituent contacting you as a legislator. So we just talked about C7. So the first one I'll talk about is Article 20, Chapter 1 of the Vermont Constitution, which is the citizens' right to petition and instruct their representatives. That is an enshrined speech right related to your state office. And that means that when we evaluate the information that a constituent has given you in a communication, one of the things that is very weighty is that they have a constitutional right to contact you and give you the information you need to adequately represent them. And one thing we do not want to do is to chill that speech right and stem the flow of information to you. We don't want to intimidate your constituents away from contacting you to divulge personal information that could be important for the work you're doing in a specific subject area. The other constitutional privilege that we consider is under Article 14, which is the speech, debate, and deliberation clause for purposes of legislators, and that is broadly referred to as the legislative privilege. And a Superior Court decision recently articulated that the legislative privilege exists, can be applied under the Public Records Act, and covers everything within the sphere of legitimate legislative business. So often, when we are attempting to advise a legislative client in this area, one of the things we'll point out is that, again, it is up to you and your discretion to identify what the privilege might apply to.
And so when we're asked that and we're responding, and I noticed in your notes here, you said to contact you as soon as possible. So I guess I'm presuming to the extent possible that we should be trying to provide the information that assists in formulating a response. Does the response come directly from us or through you?
Either, and it's up to each individual client. I urge you to contact me because you might not be the only legislator who has received the request. So even if you want to do your own independent search, review, and response, it would be helpful for me to know in case I'm working with another legislator who's on all of the same emails.
That was a setup question I was asking because I wanted to communicate. Like, always go to Ledge Council first. It sounded from a lot of what was said, it's all public records. Oh, well, I might as well turn it over. It's going to be found public record. There's a lot of things that are privileged and they know all those things to advise you to make a decision. So.
All right, any other questions for Tucker? Thank you for the resource, and that we have materials on our webpage that Tucker had submitted to us prior to, so that are helpful in looking and what prompted my questions. So appreciate it very much. And
fantastic. Thank you all so much.
So thank you.
Alrighty, thank you.
Very important.
Yeah.
I get to.
Thank you.
House go.
Alrighty. Okay, folks, so we're a couple of minutes, a few minutes early. But this is just a check-in time. You have time to now meet, do your research, prepare your reports for our discussion for tomorrow's Budget Adjustment Act. I know some folks have meetings set up with department folks and stuff like that. So, are there questions about what you need to present tomorrow? Maybe I'll just review that briefly. Okay, so, first, if you have any language changes, so, I'll just use as a for instance, I know that the Jubilee and Esme team has some potential language changes. So that means that you consult with Katie to get the actual verbiage. And you'll provide that to the committee to consider. If you have suggestions for changing what the administration has submitted in the Budget Adjustment Act, and again, that's whether it's in the language. That was that long 59-page document that people got. Then bring those forward, or in the budget line items that you have been reviewing. So bring those forward. Just as a reminder, this is not to change law, so not looking to have like the concept of a new program come up. That's not what this is for. That's not what budget adjustment is for. When we get to the budget and FY26 budget, that's where we can make other recommendations about priorities that might change and stuff like that. But that process has already been gone through last year when we developed the 25 budget. So this isn't to make any recommendations with regard to that. That being said, if there are existing programs that I'll just use childcare as an example. There's some significant money in the childcare area, and the administration is making one recommendation for what to do with that money. We might have a different recommendation to do with that money. So that's not a new program. Okay, that's something that is existing already. Same thing for any of the other things that you might see there. Yeah, Anne.
If a recommendation is that there be a side letter from the chair of Human Services and/or approach, whichever those chairs deem appropriate, is that something we should have drafted, or would that be work that would be
a side letter meaning what exactly? Because I will be doing a letter to appropriations.
No, recommending a letter to an agency saying we have this expectation.
Okay.
That kind of a thing. I can talk about.
Yeah, because I think I feel like I need more
specific.
information.
Yeah,
I feel like I
okay,
need more
okay.
information.
Well, I'll jump to our whole member.
What I'm thinking, yeah.
Some in our.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
That might not necessarily be in the, so what will happen with all the recommendations and then what we reach consensus on as a group, I'll be putting together a memo that goes then to appropriations and but that's not what Anne is talking about. She's talking about something separate from that. So, okay. Any questions? And I'm around. If you have any questions, I'm gonna sit in on the Dale budget meeting coming up. Just because I have some questions about it. And Lori, I think we're good.